Welcome, everybody, to the Appraisal Buzzcast webinar. I'm Hal Humphreys. We've got a pretty entertaining webinar today. It is a hot topic. A lot of people have confusion. A lot of people have concerns. A lot of people have questions about short-term rentals. If you live in a town like I do, which is Nashville, you will know that short-term rentals are an issue in general. But for appraisers, how do we deal with short-term rentals? Appraise Learning is hosting this webinar. And the reason we wanted to host it is we wanted to get some experts from around the country in the room to talk about best practices for appraisers dealing with short-term rentals. And there's some very specific things that we need to consider as appraisers. I've got Bryan Reynolds, partner here at Appraise Learning. In today, Bryan is a USPAP instructor, and Bryan not only knows how to appraise short-term rentals, he is a short-term rental owner. He has some skin in the game, so to speak. George Paquette is with us today. Craig Capilla, attorney out of Chicago, who often helps appraisers stay out of trouble, or if they've gotten into trouble, get out of trouble. And then we have John Dingeman, Chief Valuation Officer at Class Valuation, who has some opinions about short-term rentals and how we should approach them as appraisers. If you have not had a chance to go over to Appraise Learning and check out our education offerings, we're going to pop up here on the screen a real quick ad. It will take you to a link for Appraise Learning so that you can get a discount code on some education if you want it. And if that is up on your screen and it's covering the thing, there should be an X button there. Just hit that and it'll go away. Otherwise, click the button and get yourself a discount over to Appraise Learning. So without prattling on too much, John Dingeman, I would like for you to start this conversation off on short-term rentals and kind of set the stage for us.
Hal, well, thank you, one, for Appraisal Buzz and Appraiser e-learning putting this on, and I'm privileged and honored to participate with this esteemed group of individuals. You know, the challenge around short-term rentals is this. In 2018, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac indicated that they would start to allow the income generated from a short-term rental for qualification purposes on a loan. Typically, in a lease environment, that market rent would have been shared through the use of a 1007. We know it as a single-family comparable rent schedule. And those non-QM lenders or DSCR lenders, they would have used the same form to convey that information. And appraisers today, I think George is at Settlement One as chief appraiser over there. We see the same request repeatedly from our lender partners asking for the appraiser to share their opinion of market rent, and John, utilizing short-term rentals.
John, I'm going to interrupt you for half a second. Just for the sake of the numbskulls out there like me that aren't going to pick up on every one of the three-letter things that you say, if you say something like, you know, QE lenders or whatever you said, tell us what that means.
Oh, man, you are asking a tough one here. Let's see. Well, non-QM would be it would be something other than Fannie, Freddie, FHA, etc. And DSCR, there is a term for it. Somebody help me with it. I will pull that up as well.
Yeah, see, Hal, you forget we use acronyms, so people think we know what we're talking about. When in reality, we're just covering that with acronyms.
Well, John, I'm not trying to call you out. I just think that, you know, for I don't know what those mean, and I think it's useful to just kind of put it on the table. Hey, here's what we're talking about. Let's have a definition of terms, so that everybody's singing off the same sheet of music.
Debt service coverage ratio is DSCR.
And in simple terms, that's where the rent pays the rent covers the mortgage expense, and that's what qualifies it.
So going back, Hal, really a challenge for appraisers is they're being asked to return an opinion of market rent using the 1007 single-family comparable rent schedule to do that. And I think we can see already, and George, I don't know about you, I received one of two responses. I either receive a 1007 just really on the appraiser's own volition, returned, and in some cases, they've gone through this simple exercise of getting a daily rate from some source, multiplying that out times 30 and calling it a day. Or I get a very detailed income approach to share that number. At the end of the day, I also get a fair number of appraisers that simply say, no, I can't do this. And I think it lends some confusion. And it starts with the form, by the way, Hal, Bryan, that you and I talked about this before. The form was originally designed by the GSEs. We don't have a form today to return the potential income of a short-term rental.
Yeah, we're seeing the same things, John. I think on our side, we're seeing appraisers either look at the monthly rent or look at the daily rent and multiply it times 30 and subtract the vacancy, and which, it doesn't, encompass the expenses and everything else that goes along with the short-term rentals. So we're seeing both sides, but I would say, yeah, it's probably, most of the appraisers are declining the assignment altogether.
John, I have a question. So the 1007 form, we all know is designed for long-term rental information on single-family residences, and we're dealing here with, you've got a highest best use of the primary property as a single-family residence, but we've maybe got an ADU that's a short-term rental, or the property itself is a short-term rental. I can see where someone could make the argument that even putting short-term rental data on a monthly rental property report could be misleading, because that's designed for long-term rentals. So is there a way that an appraiser could use that form and then deliver that information and not be misleading?
The way I've seen the form used, Hal, and I have an example sitting right in front of me, the appraiser did an exceptional job at reporting this. They started, it's really 3 pages. They put some great effort into it, talking about or defining things like the direct capitalization approach, the room rate analysis, average daily rental, so that everybody knows what ADR is, and so on. Then what they did was they put the short-term rentals in a 1007. They mocked it up. And on the left-hand column, which describes the features, if you will, so rather than monthly rental, it says adjusted daily rate, and so on and so on. They've literally used a snippet tool to redefine that column. And then they removed the opinion of market rent at the bottom, because that's, of course, not what it is. And then they went through the exercise of performing a direct capitalization approach and conclusion, sharing, the average daily rent, the potential annual gross revenue, the occupancy rate, the effective annual gross revenue, projected operating income expenses, the net operating income expenses, all against the cap rate with a value conclusion. I mean, that's a pretty solid job, leveraging the form, but taking a snapshot of it, and then returning the appropriate values. But that's not always acceptable. I mean, if the lender is looking for the form itself, they're looking for the form, and they're looking for an opinion of market rent.
Yeah, so that form, if you look at your software and you look at that form, in the bottom left-hand, bottom right-hand corner, you'll see 8/88. And that means that's the last time that form was revised, in 1988. Airbnb came on the scene in 2008. A couple of guys had a place, and hey, how can we make some money? Let's blow up an air mattress, throw it on the floor, and kind of rent that little space out as kind of like a bed and breakfast. Hence, that's where Airbnb came from. So that form was created many years before there was such a thing called short-term rentals, or at least how we know it today. The form was designed by Fannie and Freddie for their use in analyzing monthly rent attributable to leases, to long-term rents, right? Not a nightly rent. So while I think you could kind of massage things around, how, to your point, because USPAP doesn't care about forms, USPEP does care about creating a misleading report. So I think if you wanted to use a pre-printed form that was designed for a particular purpose and use it for a different purpose, you really better get creative how you communicate that to your client. It's just, as far as a best practices goes, it's just not an appropriate form to use in this relatively new phenomena of short-term rentals.
Right. And I get that. And I totally appreciate that. But there are a lot of clients out there saying, we want this income on this form. George, do you have any thoughts on that? How are appraisers supposed to respond to that?
Yeah, I think it's difficult. It's a challenge. I think that, you look at these companies like Airbnb and VRBO and these types of technology companies, they really, you hear the word disruptor come around a lot, but they put it out there and then the public accepts it. And then you're looking at local government kind of wrapping their head around it and trying to figure out what to do with it after the fact. So I think, there's a huge opportunity for appraisers in this space to be able to give that value, because it's obviously needed. But how to get that in the right forms, I think is a big problem. We're seeing there's some data sites out there where appraisers can get really good information, but if you really try to get that information, a lot of these sites will hold addresses really tight. They won't give you addresses. They give you really loose information. Expenses are not known. I think it's really hard as far as the form side of it to categorize it all in one form. I think it really needs a deep dive into a summary. Using some of these data tools to be able to provide some support, I think is really the only way to be able to come up with that. If you don't have a property manager, there are some markets where they have property managers you can get all the detailed information from, and you can show that. But the form just unfortunately doesn't have enough detail in there to explain the marketing, the expenses, and everything that goes along with it.
Right. Craig Capilla, if you get a complaint filed against an appraiser and they call you and they've done a short-term rental like this using the 1007, what are some issues that you see might be problematic for them?
Well, I've got a few concerns that pop up with all of this. And I mean, I don't know, I can almost go through each facet of the development of the appraisal itself and start pulling out ideas where, we're treading on perhaps thin ice here. I think I've got scope concerns. I've got competence concerns. I've got highest and best use questions. If I put my old prosecutor hat on for a second, I've probably got an hour and a half worth of questions that immediately spring to mind that I can be asking the appraiser about how they approached this. I mean, don't forget, until not too long ago, the consideration with all of these things, I started seeing this pop up a few years back with, slap it on a 1004 or a 1025 when we had an express prohibition about any sort of those forms were not intended for use when the security for the loan wasn't just the real property asset. So now we start talking about the going concern values and the FF&E and everything else. Folks, what we're talking about is we're akin to a single room or a 2-room hotel, as opposed to what you and I generally think of as a rental single family. And yet, as this conversation continues to evolve here, I'm not sure the recipients of the valuation product have completely kept pace with the changes. I think they're asking for something that might fit their need of, hey, I've got to jam something in this loan file that should at least support collateral decision making. But I'm not sure we've built the better mousetrap yet that really gets us there. So when I start to have concerns about this, the first thing that scares me is not every single state has taken a position on this. In fact, I'm not actually sure of a single state that has come out and taken a solid position. I know there was initially some debate in Illinois. I know there was definitely some debate in the state of Tennessee about that, but I don't know that everybody else has really planted their flag in the sand about what this is. The one that scares me the most is there's going to be a state out there that looks at this and says, yeah, great. This is this is a single family residence and it's a short-term rental. And because of the highest and best use concerns we have here, a certified general appraiser needed to complete this report. Hey, Mr. Certified Residential Appraiser or Mrs. Certified Residential Appraiser, why did you think it was okay for you to be the one to do this? Don't even worry about the form for a second. We've got competence questions. We also have authorization, and authority is licensure. That doesn't confer competence, right? We've known that for a long time. But is that where this is going to blow up on someone? Is that when my phone's going to ring? I guess I don't know that yet, but I can foresee that.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing you said about this is, all right, so it's essentially a small hotel operating out of a house or out of a property. And if we're dealing with the scenario I've envisioned the entire time I've been thinking about this is in Nashville, it is not at all uncommon to have a primary residence, garage in the backyard with an ADU above it, and they're doing Airbnb on the ADU. And the question that was posed to me by an appraiser yesterday in talking about this was, well, isn't that a business value and not so much a real estate value? And he articulated, like, short-term rental permits can go away like that. It is, you're running a business out of the thing. What's the difference in considering that income against, I don't know, considering the income I generate from my appraisal office in my house as collateral for the loan? I know the difference. Like, this is the actual real estate providing the income, but it's not an unvalid question. So from the legal standpoint, Craig, the highest to best use issue ends up being, I think, the crux of this, if I'm not wrong.
I mean, not to be too difficult. I hate to be the one that comes in here. I don't mean to be negative. I don't mean to be alarmist. But I mean, look, first of all, when my phone rings, it's not because somebody's having a particularly good day. Okay. So I see people in a certain spot already when they get in here. Anybody who wants to talk to me, especially when I first left the state and started coming back out into private practice again, and people would call me and say, "Oh, you did the appraisal stuff. Do you know any good appraisers out there?" No, but I know a heck of a lot of bad ones, right? You start dealing with these things, raise your hand if, let me take that a different way. What percentage of appraisers do you think know how to appropriately value an ADU? Full stop. That's the first sequence to that question. Now, let's complicate that a little bit. Now, what if that ADU is actually a business? What if we've got that going concern value? What if the ADU is actually functioning as a hotel? How many appraisers out there do you think know how to do that? How many appraisers do you think have the wherewithal to look at this and go, "Ooh, I'm not sure I have a full understanding of the questions being asked and how to solve this problem. Maybe this isn't the assignment for me"? And I'll tell you something. My experience tells me the ones who actually stop, ask that questions of themselves, and maybe turn the assignment down are probably the ones who are most qualified to do it. It's the ones that go charging right ahead without ever asking themselves that question. That's what's going to make my phone ring later.
I hear you. And John, I want to get to you next, but I want to say this real quick. Here's the thing. If you're dealing with a property that is a single family residence with an ADU that's functioning as an Airbnb, and you're in a market where that occurs all the time, the highest to best use and valuation issue should be a fairly simple thing. And I think a certified residential appraiser should be able to do that, because that ADU value is going to be baked into the number of the sales that you're analyzing, right? But what we're dealing with here is the income being used to support the underwriting decision from an Airbnb or a short-term rental. John, so we've talked about, some of the complications, some of the problems, some of the competency issues. I would argue that a residential appraiser, certified residential, maybe even a licensed appraiser who does a lot of residential in a place where there are ADUs that are functioning as an Airbnb, if that's baked into the numbers they're looking at, I think they're fine to do that. But this question of adding the Airbnb income into the equation, how do appraisers do it? Just walk us through the process of how it should be done.
Man, I could tell you how it shouldn't be done, Hal, but I mean, listen, I've had this discussion with some other folks, including Bryan, actually everybody on this call. I understand the highest and best use argument, and I understand that there is some folks that believe a cert gen is the only person that's going to be able to appraise this property. For me, I look at it in a more simplistic way. One is, what is the zoning? If it's zoned residential and the primary use throughout the subdivision, let's call it, or the neighborhood market area is residential, could I appraise the residential property? I believe I could. If you wanted an opinion of market rent and there was lease data available and I could do that and do it in a sound manner, then I would return that value. The reality is that I can do that because the market rent is based on the real property. Look, I'm going to go to the IRS definitions. The IRS defines the income from a lease, which is defined as 30 days occupancy or more by most jurisdictions, is considered passive income. In other words, we're not working on it on a regular basis. We have to clean the house out maybe once a year, maybe do some maintenance, things of that nature, market it for a little bit, hopefully get another tenant in place. Trying to separate the furniture and all of the business income, and make no mistake about it, again, referencing the IRS, they refer to the income generated by an STR as quote unquote business income. And that is because the IRS believes you're actively participating in every day. And George and Bryan, you're both super hosts. I'm sure the efforts, which by the way, that rent, not only the daily rate that's being paid, not only is paying for the enjoyment of that property, the real property, the roof over our head, the bed we can sleep in, but it's also paying for all of those other the furniture, the utensils that I'm going to use to eat, the hand towels that I'm going to use to wash my hands. But it's also rewarding the two of you for your efforts. That's your labor that you're getting paid for. And so that's why, again, the going concern value, Hal, to me, everything that I've read up on, the income generated there is a business income, and it is a going concern value. And I don't know that you have to be an appraiser to complete that. There are business valuers around the country that probably can do it and do it very well. There's probably some cert res that can do it and do it well, and certainly many CGs, particularly those that have experience in the hotel space. And then I would just circle back to that same thing. You were talking about Nashville and ADUs. I mean, every jurisdiction is different, Hal. There are many, I live in the state of California. There are many jurisdictions that don't even allow an STR to be used in an ADU, right? And then on top of that, what is the tax that the state of California and the cities charge first of all, you got to get a permit, and then they charge a hotel tax. So a property manager can lease out a property for 12 months and charge one tax. They're responsible for collecting that. But then they're going to have to charge a hotel tax on an STR. So it really speaks to a very different product. And I'm not going to dismiss that the lenders, Craig, you brought it up, they've got to make a collateral risk decision. And they're trying to understand the income for qualification purposes. I'm just not so sure that income is tied totally to the real property.
I think that's where I'm kind of coming down on the issue is the income is not tied strictly to the real property. In the case of a super host versus a non-super host, that property is going to rent faster and more often than the one that's not a super host. Not all Airbnbs are created equally. Is there a source of information? And before I go to that, the Airbnb permits are fickle at best. I mean, I have a business partner who did an Airbnb in a neighborhood of Nashville, got the permit ready to go, and then got notification that they were not going to allow him to have the permit anymore. He had like 6 months left on the permit. Once that rolls off, it's not going to happen again. That is not in any way long-term income. Now, a lot of people, like Brian's situation up in Owensboro, he's got some Airbnbs up there that are going to be income-generating properties for a long time. But that's not always the case. And the permitting issue is, I mean, legally permissible. I think that includes permitting issues. If you don't have a permit, you can't run the Airbnb. So these are things to think about. Bryan, from an appraiser perspective, I want you to put your appraiser hat on now, and also just have in your back pocket your USPAP instructor certification, and talk to us about your notions of how appraisers can deal with these requests. What's the appropriate way to do it?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely need more guidance on this. We need everyone to kind of join this conversation. I think it depends on what you're asked to do. So the very first step in the appraisal process is to define the problem, right? Identify the problem that needs to be solved. If a residential appraiser is contacted to appraise a property and they find that it's an active short-term rental, if the lender wants to know the market value of the real estate, I think they can do that. That's no different than what they do on a regular basis. The problem, Hal, that we're seeing is that in many markets, you may have a community of properties that are transferring because of their short-term rental status, and they're selling as a whole, right? So that sale transaction included more than just the real estate. And if appraisers are pulling those out and they're using those as comps, and they're opining a value for the subject property and calling it market value, no, it's not. It's more than market value. It's a value of the entire package. Now, I recently was looking at some condos down in Florida to buy. I didn't tell the real estate agent I was an appraiser. I didn't tell the real estate agent I was a real estate agent. And we're looking at ones that were fully furnished, and then looked at a couple that were not furnished. Granted, some of the ones that were furnished, I'd still redo, right? But there were a couple that had really nice furnishings that I would not replace, even leave the artwork on the walls. And as I got to talking to that real estate agent, she said, now the appraisers won't give any value, and I hate that term, but they won't consider any of the personal property. And I said, so are you telling me that this unit's going to sell for the exact same price point as an unfinished unit? Oh, no. It's going to sell substantially higher. But to get around it, the appraisers in her market, or the appraiser she knew, was not including that in the value. If you're using those comps that sold a property sold as a short-term rental property, and you're using that, now they're going to be taxed. All their property tax is going to be based on that higher price point that included more than just real estate. It included the dishes and the art on the wall and the linens and everything else. So you've just got to be real careful. We just appraised one. How we were behind a residential appraiser. They specifically called us because of my general certification. It was in Tennessee, and I called them. They were under the impression, since there was a permit issued, that it had to be short term. And I have a condo in Nashville. We have a permit, and I called them and I said, just because the permit is there doesn't mean you have to utilize it. It green lights the fact that you can have the short term rental there, but you don't have to. And I was telling them, I'm not trying to talk myself out of a job, but I want you to be well informed as the lender. And they said, all right. They came back to me and said, no, we do want you to do the going concerns of the whole package. We did a narrative. We didn't put it on any pre-printed forms. Kelsey analyzed 16 sales of short-term rentals, right? We did income projection. We had both comparable sales and income coming out our ears. And then they wanted a market value of the real estate also. So they wanted both. And we were able to break that out successfully. It was a very large fee, and it was it was not a restricted appraisal report. It was an appraisal report in a narrative format. And we felt really good about that. We ended up doing a GIM, gross income multiplier. We certainly weren't going to use a GRM. And the data is hard to get your hands on. So doing a direct capitalization approach would have been a real challenge. So we used another very well-known technique called a GIM, gross income multiplier. And that's how we handled that. So I think the residential appraisers can 100% appraise them for the real estate. But if you're looking at the total package, while I'm not going to say they can't do that, I would say proceed with caution. Number one, make sure you're competent to do that. And I would probably run that by your state regulatory agency, because they ultimately will be the deciding factor as to whether or not they're going to frown on that or green light that.
Okay, that all makes sense. I do want to go back to John and just ask this question. So, based on what Bryan said, there's a notion that the residential appraiser can appraise it at the highest and best use of single family, appraise it as such, and do that thing, but don't touch the rental, the short term rental part of it. But one of the things you said was, maybe an appraiser doesn't need to be there for the short term rental analysis, because doesn't have everything to do with real estate value. So is there a way a residential appraiser could do a highest best use analysis showing that, in the long term, this is a single family residence, blah, blah, blah. We've got a short-term rental permit. It's available right now. I'm going to value the property, and then I'm going to do this additional analysis that shows here's the income for the short-term rental. I'm not concluding a value. I'm not opining an opinion about, how it impacts the real estate. This is the income from this side business, and do it that way.
Yeah, again, Hal, I think depending on who the appraiser is, you might gather different opinions. I mean, there's some that are going to say that absolutely a CG has to do this because it's commercial. And there's others that are going to say, well, to your point, and what I've already stated is I could probably appraise the residential property without concerns surrounding the income. Now, I will say this, that not all lenders are asking, DSCR lenders are asking for the same thing. So for qualification purposes, there's a number of things that a investor can provide to demonstrate that potential income. I'm looking at a couple of instructions or guidelines from DSCR lenders right here. And for example, there is 4 instances where they ask for a 1007 or a 1025. The 1025 is for 2 to 4 family. And in each instance, they put in parentheses, those forms must reflect long-term market rents. Must, right? And they do reference short-term rentals. And in each case where they reference the short-term rentals, they talk about the fact that you could provide previous tax returns. You could provide bank statements if you wanted to. You could provide rent rolls or something else to demonstrate that that income was there. So they're taking that from an outside individual rather than appraiser. And I'm encouraged when I do see other lenders. There was one that announced them on LinkedIn just the other day that they are now changing their DSCR program to allow Air DNA to be used. I don't know the veracity of the Air DNA reports and all of that kind of stuff, but they're certainly looking at using it at least for purchase transactions. And so if I were an appraiser, if somebody really wanted to know, I don't know that I have all access to the data. Could I return, maybe not on a 1007, but in some sort of format, what the available properties are in that I can pull up on Airbnb? Maybe. I don't know that I know all of the properties, all the details about the property, or whether or not they're competing with the property. And then we go into other areas that Craig could talk about. I don't know how closely tied to AO37 or anything else this is, but certainly a challenge when I don't know where that data is coming from or how it's being calculated, et cetera. But I would leave that to my lender partner to manage that.
Craig, just chime in real quick about AO37 and how that might apply here.
Yeah, well, if you don't mind, I'm going to pivot for starting to answer a question with a question, because the first thing that comes to mind, and one thing is I just want to make sure that we touch on at some point is, okay, so we've identified the discrepancies between long-term rental and short-term rental, right? We're here to talk about short-term rentals, but how many folks out there are making their consideration about this? We've already talked about one of the things that inhibits the form a bit is it's really intended for long-term rental. IRS telling us what rental is 30 days or more. Okay. So let's talk about the horror fact pattern that we know goes on out there, right? We were all aware of this circumstance. The appraiser gets the assignment and goes, great, well, I'm going to take the day rate. I'm going to multiply it by 30. Bang, there's my monthly rental. Now I can populate this into the form because we're going to do this. I mean, despite the fact that, I guess we've seen that for time immemorial too, even with actual leases in place versus market rental data. So it's not unique to a short-term rental. We've seen all sorts of goofy math get done in an income approach. But, what are we looking at in this scenario when we know this is happening? And what's our filter for that? I mean, let's be honest, folks. What if somebody says, no, that's absolutely inappropriate? I mean, you can't multiply the day rate like that. You've got to have at least a week worth of material so that it's smoothed out and normalized. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to take the week of 4th of July, and that's going to be the week that I select, and I'm going to run my numbers based off of that. I mean, I think we all know where this is headed, right? I mean, again, we've got a pretty significant problem here with we're really trying, I think, again, we're really trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Now, to go a little bit further with that idea, I want to make sure I have the actual text right in front of me, because I don't want to misquote it. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to grab my magical UsePap right here. I'm going to pull up AO37, and when we're going to do this live and in color, so that I'm not misquoting anything about that, because unlike Bryan, I'm not a UsePap instructor, but occasionally I play a UsePap defender on TV. And this is an issue that will come up from time to time. And I have to say, I think concerns about this are well placed. All right, so flipping right along here to AO37. Give me just a moment. I'm getting to it right now. All right, AO37, for all of you that are keeping score at home, is... All right, here we go. So I've got it right here in front of me. So the question here on AO37 is computer-assisted valuation tools, right? That's it right here in real time. Okay. The issue: appraisers rely upon market data as the basis for their opinions and conclusions. This data is used by appraisers to analyze and report on market trend information. I'm going to forget the parend for a second, or the impact different features have on their subject's value. Appraisers have access to technology that enables them to automate some aspects of the appraisal process. Regression analysis is a common example, but there's others as well. These tools generate information that once had to be calculated by hand. The information generated by this technology can enable appraisers to produce appraisals and appraisal reviews with greater credibility, but its misuse can have the opposite effect. What steps should an appraiser take to comply with UsePap when using information generated by these types of resources? Okay. Well, how widespread is the application of AO37 here? I get this thing all the time. I've been fond of saying to people for years, when I remember we're talking about a decade back or so now, when there was a lot of activity in the education market with all of these analytics tools, regression analysis tools, all of this was hitting, and every conference you went to, somebody was there with the latest and greatest software pack. And I've got this app that does this. And I will say, at an individual level, most of these things are absolutely fantastic tools, right? Don't forget, they're a tool. They're nothing more than a tool. I would get this issue all the time, and it would be another one of those things that makes my phone ring. All right, well, we have some concerns about the way you've approached this issue in your appraisal report. Okay, well, great. Well, I did regression analysis. Cool. Can you explain it to me? Well, I did a regression analysis. If you can't tell me what it does and you can't tell me how it works, then at least in my book, you're not allowed to use it. Okay. Because if you can't explain this to your reader, and if you can't give the reader a sense of why you determined that it was reliable and credible, it's not something that you can incorporate into your work product. I think that's a uniform rule when it comes to any of these things.
Yeah. Okay. So John, and I'm not going to ask you to unmute yet. I'm going to go to George next, but, the discussion about sources for information for providing this information on short-term rentals. For 25 years, I did commercial valuation. I have appraised a number of hotels over the years. Anytime I would get a hotel assignment, I would call up a company just north of Nashville up in Hendersonville called Smith Travel Research. And I would say, hey, I'm looking at a property here. Send me the packet. And they would send me 5 to 10 competing hotels in the area with average daily room rate, vacancy rates, the whole business. And that was a well-respected and sufficient place to go get information. George, from your experience, where can appraisers go to get information about Airbnbs, about short-term rentals?
Yeah, I think there's some data sources out there that I think are really good. My favorite is Data Rabu. That is a great one where you can go in, you can really put in all the analytics behind it as far as payment and the local information. AirDNA gives you a lot of information too, almost too much at times, but it's great information. And for short-term rentals, it's probably the most encompassing. But I think like kind of what Bryan talked about earlier is a big problem on the residential side, is because one comparable, in the market that I have short-term rentals in, they're called CUPs. And the CUPs, they're really hard to get in that market. I mean, there's a lot of qualifications to get it, that you can't displace a tenant to get a short-term rental. So there's a lot of qualifications to get it. So once you have it, it's very valuable. So if that property sells, now we ran through it on the other side as a buyer, the rents weren't qualifying because the appraiser was comparing it to properties that don't qualify for a CUP. So it became a big challenge because now I'm looking at it saying, well, it's way below value because of the comparables you use. So I don't think you can simply ignore that. But fortunately, I think in my market, there's rental agencies, there's agents. If he would have just used comparables with CUPs, I don't think we would have the same issue. But I think once you start to deviate from that and using monthly rentals, the value, it 3Xs on a vacation rental versus monthly rental. So it's a big problem. But I think in the last couple of years, we're seeing short-term rentals in markets that don't typically have short-term rentals. And I think there's not rental agencies, there's not agents that are comfortable with them. They're just throw my house on an app and now this is what it's worth. So as I mentioned earlier, I think as regulations kind of catch up with that could be a problem and be overvalued if the appraiser doesn't have a long history of rents that are proven to withstand. So I think, long answer to your short question is I think really is, some of the platforms that are out there that give really good information. I think agents are a great source because if the agent has a track record of the profit and loss on that property when they were selling it, because most of them are going to market it that way and show that. That's a great one to dive in on the comps and be able to look at. But I think the appraiser have to do a lot more diligence. And, I hate to see any appraiser turn down work in this market. It's such a tough market right now. So, really trying to play both sides here and think of ways that appraisers can use that. And, to talk about what Craig said, there are some really good information online, like Data Rabu, like I mentioned, where they can put a screenshot in there and put the right disclosures in there. If they're able to do something like that, I think they can still complete the 1007 on the monthly, but also give an option if the investor wants to rely on, this information from a website. That's on them, but that would be more of a Craig's alley to address. But I think there's hopefully some ways where residential appraisers don't have to turn down these assignments and still do it and protect themselves.
And Hal, hold on one second, because I just want to touch on that. So first and foremost, I'm not suggesting necessarily that AO37 is a roadblock for us, just that it exists out there. And one of the reasons it exists is, do we know the data and how it was obtained and that we're using to form our own analysis and opinions. But I'm on George's side here. I mean, I believe there's several DSCR lenders, including one that was just that I referenced in LinkedIn, that are subscribing to the idea that the loan officers, that they can use an AirDNA report to demonstrate the potential income of an STR. I don't know the value of just sending that report over to an appraiser to incorporate into the report, though, without performing an analysis on it and so on and so on. And yes, to the extent that you described, hell, I guess I could do that. Again, am I competent to do it and understand is a different story.
Okay. Bryan Reynolds, I'm going to pull you in on this. So the more I hear about this and the more questions I've received and we've received, it almost seems like we're trying to shove two disparate issues into a package that an appraiser is going to deliver to a lender. The lender, the underwriter, the lender, the loan originator, they're looking for what is the underlying value of the real estate. Oh, and you can consider this short-term rental income in your underwriting process. That seems like a side thing to me.
Yeah. So if you want to use the short-term rental income for qualifying the individual, right, as an asset, have at it. That's just part of their income producing capabilities. But if you're making a mortgage loan and the mortgage loan collateral is the real estate, then they want to know what the opinion of value of the real estate is, period. Not the opinion of the real estate and the forks I have in my drawer, right? Or the fire pit out back, or any of the other things that go along with renting a short-term rental. There's more involved in that than just the real estate. And that's the point I'm trying to make. Residential appraisers can opine the market value of the real estate. But and I'm not saying they can't do the other. I'm saying you need to investigate that more and recognize what you're doing. Please don't value the whole package or develop an opinion of the whole package and call it market value of the real estate only, because that's not true. Unless all those other assets have no value, and then you need to state that, then fine, you probably can do that. But most mortgage lenders are not going to lend on the going concern or the BEV or the FF&E. They're going to lend just on the real estate. And talking about that 1007 form, and you guys have been talking quite a bit about trying to figure out what the monthly rental rate is. We don't care what the monthly rental rate is on a short-term rental. You're using the annual income associated with this income-producing property. How just like you would be opining a value on a commercial strip center, right? Or a mini storage facility. And the reason why is because from month to month to month, you're going to have different income amounts. As Craig said, well, let's look at the 4th of July. Hey, Hal, I want you to appraise my condo in downtown Nashville, but I just want you to look at when CMA's down there or SEC's occurring and use that to forecast the entire year. Well, you'd be really missing the boat there, because that's just a prescribed period of time in which my nightly rate is 3 and 4 times higher than what it is normally during the course of the year. So that's why I use the GIM. That looks at an annual income as opposed to a monthly rental amount. Two different animals there.
But if I may break in on this, sorry, Hal, but if I may break in on this one for a second. So, Bryan, the example that you just gave there, if we need to look at this as an annualized income marker on this because we've got different seasonal rents and all of that, I mean, are we giving up the ghost here? Are we acknowledging the fact that this is a commercial endeavor then, because we have to take those things into account? We've sort of left the single family rental market all of a sudden, haven't we?
I'll let you play Mr. Attorney. I'm not an attorney. I only play one like once in a blue moon when the law will let me. But again, I'm not going to tell people what they can or can't do in their own businesses. It's a business decision. I would caution folks if they're looking to, I'm all for learning and trying to learn while you go. USPAP allows you to take assignments that you're not competent to do. You just have to do 3 things: disclose your lack of competency, get competent, and then put it in the report. So I am encouraging appraisers to proceed with caution and get competent. And finally, probably most importantly, check with your state. How is your state, when you're in front of that state regulatory board, how are they going to feel? Were you acting under what your level of licensure allows you to do? Or did you kind of step outside that level? And that's, again, so it's a business decision.
No, I think that's a great point. I'm also, look, we don't have necessary state-by-state guidance yet, and some state license programs are more or less permissible than others. So there is going to be some local flavor to all of this, too. I'm also, I think you've seen over the years, I'm not necessarily in the business of telling people what they can or cannot do. Frankly, I've got 2 kids to put through college. I'm somewhat reliant on people having that problem. But it goes back to something that you said earlier here, too, which is what's step 1 in the valuation process, right? Identify the problem to be solved. I think there's a lot of people that fast forward right through that because it says, Well, on the order that I just picked up, it says this is what they want me to do, and this is the form I'm supposed to put it on. So didn't that answer the question of identifying the problem to be solved? Well, not always. I think sometimes, I don't mean to keep beating the horse on this one, but it's about going back to basics. USPAP doesn't turn on or off just because of who ordered who ordered the assignment from you or what form they told you to put it on. And that's not unique to just this question. George, John, do you have anybody that ever gives you any issues about third-party data collectors and how that interfaces with the No, I'm sure you never get that question, right? But look, it still goes back to the appraiser has to consider what's the problem to be solved here. Am I competent to take the problem here? Do I understand what's going on? Is this appropriate for this assignment? If it's not appropriate for this assignment, what is appropriate in this context to answer the problem that needs to be solved? We don't turn USPAP on and off depending upon who's the ordering things. We always have to answer that question.
I want to piggyback on something you just said there, and I want every residential appraiser to listen very closely. Just because the subject property is a house and your license allows you to appraise houses, you have to really identify that problem. Let's say you're asked to appraise a house that you appraised last year. The homeowner calls you up and says, hey, I need an appraisal. I'll leave a check for you on the coffee table. And you're like, great. You run out, you zip through it, you get it done, you turn it in, then they call you up. They say, hey, I'm really impressed with this appraisal you did on my house. You're very familiar with it. You did it last year. You're doing it again this year. I just have one question for you, residential appraiser that appraised my house. Is the value stated in your report the before value or after value? And you say, before or after what? And the homeowner says, oh, did I forget to tell you that this appraisal is to be used in a condemnation case? The DOT is widening the street out front and they're taking my property, or at least half of it. And I need to know the value immediately before the taking, and I need to know the value immediately after the taking. And now you're thinking, oh my God, I stepped in something, right? You're licensed to appraise houses. You appraise houses all the time. In fact, you appraised that one last year. You may be highly competent to appraise that house for a whole lot of reasons, but you might not be competent to appraise it in a condemnation case. So really take the time to identify the problem to be solved before you even think about going to the next step.
And I think there's good warning in that. I think we lost Hal for a second, so we'll wait for him to pop back up here too, because I know he's got more questions for us. But I think there's good warning in that. I recently had a scenario where I had a certified general, a certified residential appraiser appraising a condo here in the city of Chicago. And they had actually appraised the condo for this particular owner several times. Initially, it was owner occupied. The second go around, about a year and a half, 2 years later, the appraisers got called back, same owner, but at this point, he had put a renter into the place. The reason given, and this is private client work, this was not for any lending purpose. The reason both times the appraisers were given was, well, I'm still not sure what I want to do. So I just want to get a sense of what's going on in the market, just in case I want to go ahead and sell this place. Well, all of that's well and fine. And you got water under the bridge for a couple of years until the appraiser gets a phone call from another appraiser and says, well, now that you and I are the two designated appraisers in this condo deconversion project that's going on, why don't you come in and we'll select the third appraiser and we can baseball this thing into the final value that's going to happen. Again, this is stuff that the appraisers didn't actually have as information when the matter came up. But in their sense, hey, this is simple. I've done a lot of work for this person over the years. They're a good client. They just want to know what their property is worth. Well, it's not always just as simple as that. How many times do you get somebody that comes out here in this circumstance? Now, again, we're talking about lender-based assignments here when it comes to short-term rentals. So I realize we've diverged off that path a little bit. But how many instances are you going to actually see a private client assignment in something like this that goes, hey, I've got this great house up at Lake so-and-so, and I'm just genuinely curious, what do we think this is worth? It's been in the family for years. We love to get up there and use it sometimes. Residential appraiser, why don't you come out and do this one? If I can do that every day and twice on Sunday and I can figure out what the value of that boat dock is. That's all well and fine until you find out that the 3 siblings who are left behind after mom just finally passed away have looked at this and said, we can each get 2 weeks a year with this house. And for the remainder of the year, we're going to rent it out through the nose and we're going to make tons of money off this property. So identifying the problem to be solved here really is a significant issue that needs to be addressed, again, with every assignment. And determining your own competency from that is always an important feature.
Yeah, so it looks like we've lost Hal. So I'm going to ask just a couple of questions that I'm dying to hear some answers. Let me ask George, and there's Hal. George, how many of your lender clients are really wanting appraisers to put short-term rental income on the 1007 and utilize that in the valuation?
I think it's a good amount. A good amount of clients are asking for that. It's usually coming from the broker side. They're really pushing on that, looking for that potential rent. I think on the DSCR loan clients, all of them, they're all looking for that because that's what's qualifying the loan. Yeah. So I think that's a problem. We're also seeing some of the midterm rentals, which is 30-day rentals, rented to hospital employees, traveling executives. That's a business as well, and that's a monthly rental. It requires no regulations in most markets. So it's definitely becoming more and more that we're seeing, and more from conventional clients because of the Fannie Mae decision.
And I'm going to turn this back to Hal, but one last question on this same line. If an appraiser out there watching right now says, yeah, that happened every time I get a call, they're wanting the short-term rental in there, and I know I shouldn't be doing that, but they're pushing. It's a good client. I don't want to jeopardize a relationship. What advice do you have to a practicing appraiser right now that says, that's me? How do I handle this client that I don't feel it's right to put the short-term rental income there, but that's what they're wanting me to do? I don't want to jeopardize my relationship. What words of wisdom or advice would you give them, George, to kind of push back, but doing it in a gentle way that doesn't jeopardize their relationship?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we run into it quite a bit. We try to front load the client from the start to really temper expectations to say what you're going to be able to get out of this and what you're not going to be able to get. From the appraiser standpoint, it really comes down to reputable data. We tell them, if you don't have the information, you got to tell us. Be honest with us. We're gonna protect you with a client. We're not gonna dismiss you and go on to another appraiser. At that point, if we trust that appraiser enough to give them the assignment, he or she says that they don't have the data to be able to move forward, we got to go back to the client and educate them on that, and then think of a plan B if we have to bump that up to commercial or what we need to do. And even that, I think on the commercial side, the data is really hard, as you probably find, Brian. Knowing your work ethic, if you have the short-term rentals, depending on how you market it, the photos you take, the algorithm of where it puts you onto the site, it really varies a lot. It can make a big impression on your rentals. So that data might not be 100% because it's not always apples for apples. I read a recent article where a woman bought 2 units next door, identical brand new construction units, put them both on the platform. One, for whatever reason, got ranked really high up on the algorithms with Airbnb and VRBO. She was doubling the income of her other unit. They're identical side-by-side units, but it had more exposure. So there's so many different variables in that I think even commercial appraisers are going to struggle with at times. I think, you can look at it, but, on an annual basis, but it's not always going to be apples for apples, even if the property is apples for apples.
Yeah.
I have a question, and forgive me. There's a really good chance that I'm just an idiot about a lot of things, and I'm happy to admit that. But what I'm hearing John say is, they're using this income to qualify the person for the loan. So help me understand this. Are the requests coming from lenders saying, hey, do the valuation, also give us this 1007 that shows the income from this unit, but don't consider that an evaluation? Or how is that working?
We're seeing mainly, it depends on the type of client, but I think mainly they're asking for the 1007 to be short-term rental income, especially when you're seeing like refinances, because they have all the records to show what their income history has been, and they're going to the lender. On the purchases, they might not have that. If it wasn't a short-term rental in the past, if they're purchasing a short-term rental, they have that information to qualify for the loan. But typically, most of them aren't asking for both the monthly and the short-term rental. They're looking for just the short-term rental income.
Okay. All right.
In my experience, John might have something different, but
John?
It's the same. Again, I think it's more often than not, our clients are looking for the 1007 to be completed, leveraging short-term rentals in the 1007 grid, and providing an opinion of market rent based on those properties, right? And we can see it when the appraiser does complete a 1007 using leases, and the opinion of market rent falls below what that potential income is, and the lender partner will come back and say that's not what we were expecting. It looks like the appraiser used leases and not short-term rentals, because there are going to be appraisers that just complete the assignment based on what the form is asking for. Again, I think, because I don't remember who made that point, but Craig said a lot of appraisers just complete the assignment as requested. And so they see the 1007, they know what the 1007 is used for, and they complete it in that fashion, regardless of what the request was from the client. But we will make every effort to ask an appraiser to determine if they are, one, competent in completing the assignment, comfortable in reporting it on the 1007. And we've seen appraisers do different things. I shared with you one that I'm looking at here where the appraiser took a screenshot. I've seen others do things like cross out sections of the 1007, or simply leave sections blank. So, for example, I saw one where the appraiser left the opinion of market rent blank, and indicated with a single disclaimer that the market rent represented something else, and these short-term rentals were displayed for the lender's viewing purposes only, really, right? What was active out there. What you end up seeing is the request comes back is, hey, the appraiser forgot to complete the form. The market rent is blank. And that presents some challenges. I mean, I think there's plenty of appraisers. I think there's plenty of appraisers that are competent in completing that type of assignment. I think there's Bryan and George have already expressed it. I believe the same thing. There's some opportunities here through education, through gaining competency to provide a solution to those lenders that are looking for this. And I think there's an opportunity for somebody to develop the appropriate reporting form that lenders are used to digesting. Right, George? And I think that's really where we're at right now. We're looking for the appraiser to complete the analysis and an opinion of market rent using a form we're familiar with.
Yeah, and it seems like, again, Craig said it best. And this happens all the time, shoving a square peg into a round hole. The form is not designed for short-term rentals, and you've got to do some ooging of the form in order to get the short-term rental data in there. And that there's a really strong argument that, you're bordering on misleading by doing that. And considering the fact that Fannie Mae is on the verge of retiring the 1004 and offering up the new UAD system, I don't see them creating a new form just for short-term rentals.
Hey, Hal, I just got this email, and you did too, but I want to read it, and whoever wants to answer this, I think would be great. Our friend Pam sent me an email, and it says, appraiser is asked by a lender to perform an appraisal for a mortgage finance transaction of an STR. The lender plans to sell the loan in the secondary market. They also ask for a 1007 to accompany the report. Should the appraiser just refuse? What say you guys?
Craig?
So I'm always on the limited facts we have available there. I think it's prudent for every single appraiser out there, if they receive a request like that, to consider whether or not I am permitted and competent to complete this assignment. I think at some point in my career, I'm going to commission some artwork. I'm actually going to ask somebody to make a needlepoint for me for my wall in my office. And it's going to be the phrase that's most uttered that I have heard: both when I was a board prosecutor and in private practice. And it will be the phrase, I wish I would have turned that down. And I'm going to get that in a really nice needle point, and I'm going to hang it on my wall, because it's going to be what paid for that wall and everything else that's contained within the office too. I think that's a great question. I can't answer that question for everybody. I can't answer that particular question for a particular appraiser in a particular circumstance, but I don't think enough appraisers ask themselves that question.
Fair enough.
And it keeps Mel and Peter and me awfully busy.
Yeah.
I think that's it. USPAP does not turn on and off. Now, we could do the AO21 thing. I'm not going to waste your time putting that chart up in front of you all. So facets of USPAP may engage or disengage at times. But the reality is that USPAP is a forever thing. And the moment you all decided to become appraisers, get into this profession, get yourself a license or become certified, you've sworn that you're going to adhere to USPAP. It doesn't go away. So if any client ever approaches you and asks you to do something that USPAP or your licensure, which is actually still another component of USPAP, will not allow you to do, you can't do it. And I think that's how I'm going to answer that question.
Okay. My answer just off the cuff, if for me, if somebody sent me that request, I'd say, yeah, thanks. No, I'm not interested. But I'm not going to sit here and tell appraisers out there in the world, you can't take this assignment. I'm just not going to do that. I think there are probably ways to do it. The question, the thing I keep coming back to is, all right, so if I'm asked to value a freestanding single-family residential piece of property that is being used as a short-term rental, and I look at it and I say, look, it's legally permissible, it's financially feasible, it's physically possible, and short-term rental at this point right now is maximally productive. I can earn more money through a short-term rental than I can long-term leases. Then I think I could appraise that property as a short-term rental and then, look at sales of short-term rentals and address it as such. The other thing that I'm seeing here is you've got, and I think that I don't know, it may fall under a commercial scenario. Maybe not. But the other scenario that I'm seeing is the lender is asking appraisers, hey, appraise this single family residence. The owner is including the short-term rental income for qualifying purposes. And it seems like the lenders are saying, we just want to verify that and have an appraiser do that part of it. There's a lot of work involved in verifying short-term rental income. It's not just calling around and getting a few leases. You have to consider a number of things. What is the average daily room rate? Fridays and Saturdays in my neighborhood are $100 more than Mondays and Tuesdays. CMA weekend in Nashville is way more than any other weekend in Nashville. That said, there's also the notion of not every night is occupied. You're not going to get that every time. You've got cleaning fees. You've got management fees. You've got to replace the sheets. You've got to replace, things that fall apart quickly. The shuffleboard table may break. You got to go deal with that. There's a lot of information that you have to have in order to determine that. And I'm not a USPAP expert. I'm not a lawyer. But my recollection is USPAP says you cannot make unsupported adjustments, or you cannot make unsupported assumptions. And you've got to have support for every one of those little items in the process. Am I wrong about that, Bryan?
Yeah. So, the thing about USPAP in a nutshell, USPAP wants you to be competent or get competent. USPAP wants you to be ethical. USPAP wants you to create credible assignment results. And USPAP doesn't want you to create a misleading report. That's kind of USPAP in a nutshell for real property appraisers. Read the first 24 pages of USPAP, read them again. You could do almost anything with extraordinary assumption, hypothetical conditions, scope of work. What I would be afraid of, we have USPAP, which is your minimum, your bare bone minimum standards, but then we have what we call best practices, right? And I could appraise a hotel and put it on a 1004 form. I'd have to add a whole lot of stuff and I'd have to redact a whole lot of stuff. And just why would you do that? Why would you go through that trouble? FHA used to require everything be put on a 1004 form, whether it be a condo or a 2 to 4 family home. You put it on a single family appraisal report form. And USPAP doesn't dictate the format or style of real property appraisal reports. But why? Why would you go through all those hurdles, right? And so why would I try and manipulate a 1007 form that's specifically designed for long-term rents? Why would I try and manipulate that to put short-term rents on there? I don't. So the one we just did in Nashville, we did a narrative report. If we were going to put a snippet of a 1007 in there, that would be for long-term. Do you want me to show you what I think it would? Here's my opinion of what the rent would be long-term. Here's what my opinion of rent would be for short-term. And I'm going to look at that on an annual basis, right? So I just wouldn't, right? And it's a business decision. I'm a big advocate for appraisers trying to increase their skill and knowledge. I'm not going to talk about don't do this, don't do that. But if you need a helping hand, maybe that's an opportunity for you to team up with someone that has some expertise that will help you, do a credible job. We do that all the time. We just bid on a forest. And I'm not a timber expert, right? So we lined up a forester to be part of our team if we get that assignment. And we collaborate with others all the time on some of these big projects that, listen, I'm not that smart. I just surround myself by people that are smarter than me. So that's what I would consider doing, is reaching out for a helping hand.
Okay, so I'm gonna try and bring this home, and I want to just do a kind of a round robin, get everybody to just kind of give a final thoughts on this. I think a lot of people have joined in on this webinar today to try and understand, how do I do these things? Can I do these things? What's the most appropriate method to do it? So, I still think we're dealing with two separate issues. The income for qualification for a loan doesn't necessarily have any impact on real estate value. But if an appraiser is called and asked to, give me a straight up market value like you normally do for single family residences, we'll assume highest and best use is single family residential, but we want you to give us an opinion of short-term rental rent to support what the property owner has given us. Can an appraiser take that job, George?
Sorry, caught me on mute. I'm going to give the worst answer, and I would say it depends. Because of the data, because of the market, looking to see what you have. I think that's a big one, because I think if the highest and best use is as a short-term rental and it creates the most income, appraising it as a monthly rental is not accurate. It's not. You're not giving it its full potential. So I would say it really depends on the market. I think the appraiser has to look at the whole picture to see if he or she has access to data and information to be able to complete it. And if not, back out or like Bryan said, get with somebody that's familiar with it and get some experience.
Okay. John.
I'm going to give a similar answer. I mean, it's the answer for all appraisal, right? And it does depend. I think it depends on whether or not the appraiser is competent. I believe that they need to ask their client, to Craig or Hal, you ask the question, appraiser gets this assignment, and do they just proceed? I think the appraisers that just proceed and then answer with the 1007 and put long-term rents when that's not what the client was expecting, that can create challenges and problems. So I think it's important to go back, communicate with the client. Bryan just said he did it with his, and say, hey, is that what you were looking for? They said, no, Bryan, give us a going concern value. And he put it as a narrative report. So that worked out well in that situation. If it didn't, and they're going to push to put it on a 1007, which many will, and you don't feel comfortable in doing that, you don't feel competent in returning a going concern value or STRs in market rent, then call it a day and let your client know that you're not going to proceed. And I feel a little bit differently about the highest and best use than George does, or maybe some others. Hal, I don't know if we're aligned in this regard, but I look at my subdivision, 500 homes. Some of them are STRs. Many of them are rentals, but they're predominantly owner occupied. Highest and best use, or the return on my money, would be to move out of the house and operate it as an STR, but that doesn't mean that's what everybody's doing. And so I could appraise the residential real property, return a market rent using leases, and let you make a decision on whether or not they qualify based on the income, whatever that looks like, STRs, tax returns, air DNA reports, or whatever.
Okay. Craig?
I'm really disappointed in the last two answers because I'm the profession that always says it depends. So I think it's not fair that they got to get out in front of that one. Come on, man. That's our sandbox. We're already talking about licensures and qualifications and all that. Like, leave me my space in this. All right. No, I think I don't think it's as simple as a yes or no answer, which is how I'm going to get my way back into the it depends. And it's as simple as this. I think there's a number of facets of this that I still don't think we have a concrete answer about. I think the crux of this whole problem is the highest and best use analysis. I think it is going to be situationally dependent on highest and best use analysis. But I'm going to tell you this right now, that if the understanding of the highest and best use analysis is that this property in question is going to be best positioned as a commercial venture, then I think we've answered that question to this is cert gen territory, at least in every state and province, and anybody else who has signed on to any version of USPAP or the International Valuation Standards. I mean, we know what that one looks like. The other one is I still think we're arguing apples and oranges here when it comes to the 1007 form, right? I don't think short-term rental income can be considered to be a market rent for any of these properties, which is what that form's intent is. Where I will disagree with Bryan on one quick thing, I think when he puts his USPAP instructor hat on and he says that USPAP does not tell you how you may report something, I 100% agree with him there. Where I disagree is if you take something like a 1004 form, you take something like a 1025, and it says right at the back when you get to your certifications and you get to those other affixed statements within, when it says, I shall not modify, I shall not delete on any of those things, it's the same scenario as the appraiser that goes out in a divorce assignment and throws it on a 1004 form. While that might not have been strictly a USPAP concern about how you report things, I'm going to tell you, you're booking a one-way ticket to go in front of your state board because you signed a false certification. You're right. It's not a standard 2 violation in that USPAP said you're not allowed to do that. But you also said somewhere else in the report, I know I'm not allowed to do that. And then you signed it. Therein lies the difference. And I'm kind of splitting a hair there because as a pure USPAP question, Bryan's 100% correct. The problem is the form itself and its contents eliminate that wiggle room that USPAP gives us. That's why if you've got to be stuck to a form of any kind, I'm on team GPAR for life, okay? Because anything that you can jam into that format that gives you, the appraiser, complete autonomy about how you're going to do this, I think you're in a better circumstance. Flipping the page from that, everything that you can do in a narrative format where you get to select your words and you get to write this for your reader, I think goes to your benefit. So to Bryan's credit, when they got this circumstance popping up, had that interface with the client. Hey, I can do this. Hey, I don't think I can do that. I can get it to you this way instead. Let me write a narrative. That's what I'd like to see appraisers do when they get anything that has any sense of complexity to it. Because I know in my line of work, let me tell you, how do you write your argument so that you can make sure the judge understands it? And the answer is in crayon. Okay. That's the same thing you're dealing with here between getting stuck into a form or actually getting to now fully embrace the freedom that USPAP gives you and direct your reporting of your conclusions and your opinion in a format that is most usable to your reader. So that was a ramble. It still comes under "it depends," but it's because I think there are more questions than that need to be asked and answered. It's just not a yes or no question.
And I think, Hal, that is the argument that most appraisers are going to make and are making today. And that is on the side of what Craig just said, is the intent of the form and the way it's written. That's not what I'm going to be reporting. So I'm not going to use that form. And I don't know about George, but I mean, we already said it was a large number of lenders that are asking for it. But there's a large number of appraisers today that are just flat out saying no.
Okay. Bryan, your answer to the question?
So I gotta say this because Craig teed it up, Craig, I got a black marker that I can mark out anything I want to. I promise you, it covers stuff up really, really good. I know Freddie Mac says you can't add, change, delete, modify a form. They don't say anything about clarifying, right? So I'm going to do a lot of clarifying. But actually I wouldn't use that form anyway. So it's a moot conversation. But to answer your question, how I'm going to kind of piggyback them, they stole my line of "it depends." So I won't say that. I will say this. If you remember back in the day when people would call you and say, "Do you pre-comp?" Right? We don't get those calls very often anymore. I would always say, "Yes, I do. I pre-comp as soon as you prepay." No, I'm not going to give away my services. Pre-comp means you're doing an appraisal, right? But there was an alternative to pre-comp. If you want to know the sales in a neighborhood, that's factual data. And I can give you the sale prices over the last 18 months in a prescribed area. I can share that data with you, right? Well, I think if you want to know what rental data is in a specific locale, I can provide you that data, right? So I'm not so sure that I couldn't say this is the long-term rents on the 1007. And if you want to know what the short-term rents are in a particular market area or submarket, I think you could probably provide that. So that's my answer. I just if anybody gets anything out of this, one, appraisers don't use a sales comparison approach and pull a short-term rental sale that's sold with everything, bring that home to your subject property and appraise your subject property and call that market value of the real estate, because it's not. It's more than that. And that's the real big concern I have. And any lenders or AMCs watching, please, AMCs, push back to your lender clients that are saying we want short-term rental income on the 1007. Educate them. You want the short-term rental income for qualifying purposes, but the security, the collateral for that mortgage is the real estate. And we don't want the appraiser opining the total package, and then you foreclose and it's going to be substantially less because all you're foreclosing on is the real estate, not everything.
Perfect. All right. So here are my thoughts on this. I think, at the end of the day, the thing I always ask myself when a client asks me to do a thing, whatever it may be, if I'm not comfortable with that, it's on me as the appraiser to determine the appropriate scope of work, which is the research and analysis that leads to a credible assignment results. That's my job. John can ask me to do anything he wants to ask me to do, but it's my job as the appraiser to determine what is appropriate. So I'm going to look at these things and make that determination for myself. The rub, and to be honest with you, if a lender came to me and said, I want you to appraise this house, the borrower is using short-term rental income to qualify, real quick, just verify the short-term rental income. Well, two things cross my mind. Number one, that's a lot of research. Number two, in stating this is the market rent, I have concluded a value. That is an appraisal step, concluding a market rent, right? That's a huge thing. I'm going to say I think putting it on the 1007 is misleading. I'm not going to do it. It doesn't fit. I can't shoehorn this information into that form. The problem is, for us appraisers out here in the world, there are clients that saying, well, if you won't do it, we'll find someone else who will.
Yeah.
So I think the most important thing said came from John on that lines is we need to talk to lenders and we need to talk to AMCs and have them understand that this is not an appropriate shoehorning of information about this one thing into this 1007 form. I think it is just kind of on the face of it, just misleading to put that information on that form. It just people 5 years from now, somebody's going to look at that file, say 1007. Oh, that's rental income. Oh, that's good. And they're not going to understand the nuances of the differences between those things. When somebody sues, then Craig's going to go into the appraiser into court and they're going to dive deep, deep, deep into the nuances of the thing. And I'm not willing to do that personally. I know that there are probably some folks from the foundation in watching this webinar, trying to, like the rest of us, get their heads around the issue of short-term rentals. I think we can say squarely with assuredness, we have not answered any questions today other than to say it depends. This is a complex issue. There are a lot of moving parts. And, I think it behooves all of us to stop, slow down, and think about where does this information really need to go? Does it need to go on a 1007? Probably not. That's my take. Any last words from you guys before we call this a webinar?
I noticed somebody put something in the chat about a course, and I'll just say I'm working on two. It's a series of 2 courses. One is kind of an introductory course to what short-term rentals are, and the difference between real estate and real property, the rights inherent of owning a piece of real estate, and the differences between short-term, the use of the real estate on a given day. And the second one will be a deeper dive. So I am working on that. I've been working on the first one for almost a year now. It's taken a lot of research, and I hope to have that out within the next 3 to 4 months, the first course. So,
okay. And that will be over at appraiserelearning.com. Anybody else with final thoughts before we call it a day?
I have a quick wish list item, I guess, or several wish list items that I'd like to put out there. And Hal, it kind of touches on a few things that you were just speaking on here, which is I get the sense, there very well may be some folks from the foundation here watching this today. I think there may be various folks involved who are involved at the state regulators at some level. We may have board members, administrators, and the like who are watching all this stuff, because I think this is a topic that actually caught a number of eyes. What I'd like to see happen here I know this is just what we need in life is another blue ribbon panel on some crap, right? Okay. But the reality here is I'd like to see some of the regulators and some of the market participants who are actually operating in the space. Hey, why don't we all put some heads together and figure out what needs to be done here? Because one of the things I'm also still not entirely sure of is the lender who's asking the AMC to procure this type of assignment, and please give me a 1007, but with the short-term rental information on it. So can you, residential appraiser, get me that information? I don't know if anywhere within that chain, anybody is actually still answering the question that needs to be asked for the end user, who I suspect is for the folks who are actually backstopping that non-qualifying loan, and they probably have some collateral concerns about the borrower themselves. If we're providing this product with a 1007, and we've all expressed where our concerns may or may not lie in all this, are we actually providing any usable and helpful information for anybody anywhere along this process? So how about the folks who actually have some impact on whether or not an appraiser is going to be asked to perform this kind of an assignment? Can we get those heads together and maybe get some guidance? Like, first of all, is this a problem of our own creation? Is this a question that actually needs an answer? Or is somebody who doesn't know any better asking the wrong question here? Okay, now if we can determine if it's the right question being asked at this point, now can we start getting some more guidance on who can or cannot answer this question? Because somebody mentioned here, the great concern is if appraiser A turns this down, is that assignment just going to get handed over to appraiser B, who will do anything, and they'll do it for $10 less? If that's the case, we're still going to come up with some pretty bad outcomes here. And if, I don't know, hypothetically, we see some market disruptions at some point that come in and hit the short-term rental market for any reason, then the liability chain is going to engage. And it's going to be everybody else who touched this along the way. We're going to need to find out who's left holding the bag. So either way, I think we're setting ourselves up for some bad outcomes here. Can we actually get some of the powers that be and some of the actual interested parties in all of this? Hey, let's try to solve this thing so that we can give good guidance for once and for all.
I think that's great. And that's a perfect segue into closing this webinar out, where we were going to talk about the upcoming Valuation Expo, which will be August 6, 7, 8. If you have not registered for Val Expo, there is a registration form on your screen right now. If you've already registered, go ahead and click the X. If you haven't registered yet, click register now. Here's the thing I would suggest, I'm not a huge fan of meetings and blue ribbon panels. I think a lot of times it's a waste of time. But here's the thing. If we have people from the foundation in the room, and I'm certain that we do, if we have regulators in the room, and I'm certain that we do, if we have lenders and AMCs in the room, I'm absolutely positive we do, because two of them are sitting here in the room with us right now. Valuation Expo is coming up. There's not a lot of free time, but there will be some time that we could pull some people aside and just have this conversation around a table, and then set up a way to look at this from a top-down perspective. And just look, there's so many appraisers out there that are just, they're kind of befuddled at how are we supposed to do this? I don't want to get in trouble. I want to make my clients happy. I want to do the right thing. I know I can find this information, but I'm afraid to do it because of X, Y, or Z. I think at Val Expo, we just say, hey, let's pull some folks aside, have a 30-minute, hour-long meeting, and we just define a blue ribbon panel and dig into it. I think that's a really good idea.
Hey, Hal, that table that we're set around we have this conversation, can we have an adult beverage at that table?
I think it is imperative that we do that, because otherwise we're not going to be able to hit around all of the issues, and more than one adult beverage would be appropriate.
Perfect.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. John, always good to see you. George, pleasure to have you in the room. Craig, hope to see you soon. I got fingers crossed over here. Brian, thank you for your time. Those of you in the webinar, thank you for joining us today. We had almost 700 people in the room at one point, which is absolutely fantastic. Thanks, everybody, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Guys.